Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the 3D Printed Gamer, where I talk about stuff related to 3D printing and or gaming. Yeah, that's what we do. So today, I actually have a number of things to talk about, but let's talk about stuff I've been printing first. This is a stun grenade from, well, it's for my son's cosplay. I don't know if you remember a while back I mentioned he was doing a McCree cosplay, and I'd already done a hat badge and some bullets, and I have most of his gun printed, and I haven't gotten around to assembling that yet, and that's a project for soon. But the latest thing to add to his cosplay was some stun grenades, so I actually printed a few of these. And I don't know if you can see, maybe you can, maybe in the black, oh, there you go. Okay, let's see if I can get it to, there we go, all right. All right, do you see that little crack right there? That is separation of layers. And it has been the bane of my existence when using ABS, which is what this is, when using ABS to print things. And although this is totally usable as is, it has some tiny, tiny separations, and this one that's right here is the worst of the lot. But I have had some other projects with worse examples of that, and I know I've shown them to you, so I'm not going to bother to dig them out. But I have discovered both the cause and solution. And the cause is that apparently the ABS is really susceptible to temperature changes. So, for example, with this, because it prints like this and it's so tall that the lower parts are fine, but as you get higher and higher up, it's away from the print bed, which has heat rising from it, and it doesn't have necessarily the amount of heat that it wants up here when it's finishing the print. And the height that starts to happen really varies depending on the piece, and I don't quite know the rhyme or reason. But what I had discovered a while back is that because of the openness of this printer, and really, frankly, most inexpensive printers have this open architecture, that can create issues with ABS. And so, as you can see here, I've been experimenting with sealing it up when I'm printing, and I was just using cardboard to test it out. Turns out, it makes a big difference. I finally decided to do that when I was printing this piece here, and even see how this is not so tall at all, but you can kind of see maybe that the there we go, that's a little better. It's got a little bit of a curve to it, and that's because it just lifted right off the print bed. And so I'm hoping that, and I have like I said, I've been experimenting, and I've found that I haven't had near the problems when it's all sealed up. So what I did is I bought myself an enclosure that I'll be getting in the next week or so, and it's an acrylic piece, or a series of pieces that completely surrounds this thing. Well, actually, it covers the front, covers the back, kind of covers up these side areas like I have them here, and when it's all done, it should really help to just keep the heat in and keep a consistent temperature while the print is happening. And I think it's the consistency that's the real issue. I think I printed 4 of these, and this is the only one that had problems, but the most notable thing about the difference between the others and this one was that they all got printed out here, sitting about here, but on the night that I printed this one, it got cold that night. And so And I think that's why we had the issues. Anyway, once I get the enclosure, I'll be printing everything ABS anyway within the enclosure, and we'll see how much of a difference that makes over time. But just thought I'd share that with you. Other things I've been printing. So I use a lot of, when I do my simple designs, because most of the stuff that I design for myself are really simple, I've been using 123D Design, which is a free program, but the company that makes it apparently decided that they weren't going to support it anymore. They were still going to make it available, but they had things like online storage of your 3D files. So whenever I was making anything for that, I was just storing it in their cloud, because it was just so much easier to then just log on and all my stuff was right there. And I didn't make a ton of things, so I didn't have to worry about it. Well, one of the things that was stored there was my old trophy base for the Magic the Gathering tournaments at the store. Or not tournaments, but the leagues. The league tournaments. And so like I said, they were going to stop supporting the program, which really meant two things. One, they weren't going to do updates for it anymore. That's fine. For what it does, there are a couple of things I would love for it to be able to do, but the fact that it doesn't isn't a huge deal. It's still a useful program for me, and I will continue to use it. But the other thing, and the other more important thing, was they were getting rid of their cloud storage. And that was only really a problem because I didn't find out about this change until after they took everything down. They told everybody, hey, take your stuff down in like a month or something. And it had been a while since I'd done any designing with it. And so by the time I got back to it, I couldn't find my stuff. And when I searched around, I discovered that's why I couldn't find my stuff, because they had taken it all down. So with that preface in mind, I don't know if you remember the old one, and I don't have one handy. But the old one was a series of just simple concentric circles, 3 of them, large, smaller, and smaller, with a planeswalker symbol on the top. So this is my new one, and as you can see, it's more angular. And one of the things, well, it's kind of a funny story, but let me just say that one of the things I didn't like about 123D Design was that because I had the circular base, when I was putting text on it, it was really hard to get the text just right because it was circular and it didn't really like to, it didn't really want to go around a circle. It really wanted to sit on a flat surface. So I recreated this with that in mind. And as you can see, and unlike the other ones, so I would have like sort of generic text here. I would also have generic text for the name of the set that the trophy was for. Well, in this case, I was able to use the actual logo. The logo text, if you will. Now, here's the funny thing, and the funny story about this is that when I was all done with this, somebody had me look at some 3D files for them on Microsoft's 3D printing program, which is called something. I don't know what it's called now. It's the one that comes free with Windows now. And it's, in most respects, it's actually a much simpler program than 123D Design. And so my first reaction is probably wouldn't use it because I already know how to use the other one, and why do I want to bother using this other one? Except that had I known about it at the time, this one, the Microsoft one, actually has a nice tool for putting text on a curve. Would have solved that problem very easily. The other nice thing is that 123D Design doesn't import STL files very well. It won't. It'll import them, but you can't really edit them in the program. You can sort of add to them. You can, but you can't really do much with them. With the Microsoft program, you can actually bring an STL file in, and you can do every bit of editing with its tools that you can with something that was created within the program from scratch. So that's kind of nice too. The problem is, like I said, it's very simplistic. It has some basic geometric shapes and some basic things you can do to them, but it doesn't have the same range of tools that 123D Design does. But there's no reason not to have both, especially since you can import STL files and do stuff with them with that program, like full editing tools available to it. So that's pretty cool. All right, next thing I wanted to talk about was Kickstarter. I have a Kickstarter to talk about, and before I get into it, I just want you to know that A, this was a Kickstarter I was planning on talking about anyway, but B, the company did send me a bit of a sample, but we'll get to that in a minute. So the Kickstarter I want to talk about is called Thunderchrome 2, 3D printable sci-fi scenery for war games, and if you look in the description, you will find a link to this Kickstarter. But what is in the Kickstarter, you ask? Well, let's go take a look. Primarily what we're looking at is a modular building system for science fiction gaming. And it's basically it's a selection of walls and floors and stairs. On the surface, not a lot to it. But the truth is, I do really like the designs of these things, including some of the cool little extras like the buildings that can be damaged, so that like you can print them out so there's damaged pieces that you can remove should the building become damaged during play, which is kind of awesome. And things like doors. But mostly what I like is the design aesthetic. Their original Kickstarter, which would be Thunderchrome 1, I guess, that one was post-apocalyptic, like shantytown buildings. Wasn't really my thing. I actually, well, shantytown buildings are my thing, and I have made some of those myself using more traditional modeling methods, and I've never really been that thrilled with those kinds of buildings done. I've seen them as resin casts and the 3D files, and I just feel like it lacks the random nature that you get from traditional model making methods. But they were fine. But the look of these pieces are particularly good. It's sort of it's got a real industrial sci-fi aesthetic to them. Let's have a look. So these are actually some pieces that I printed from the samples they sent me. This is a wall that's supposed to have like an AC unit and stuff. And this is a ceiling. I actually showed you this piece earlier. But you can see it also has a lot of, ducting and venting on the top. A standard doorway. Sorry, that's upside down. A standard doorway. And then a floor. And the way these all go together is nice and simple. The floors have slots. The walls have channels. And they just all slot together like that. See if I can get more light down here. There we go. That didn't help all that much. It's all about the angle, I guess. Oh, and the problem is I didn't prime the inside, so the inside is black. The outside, you get much more a look at what that looks like. And then the ceiling, or the roof actually, has little guides as well. And of course, this roof is slightly misshapen because of the bad printout. And if these walls were all glued in, this would be super simple. But they're not. Yeah, that's not going to go. So, but in any case, I was really happy with how these printed out. I really like the look of them. I'm always concerned when things have too much detail. You know, if you're going to 3D print them, because for this kind of printing, the more detailed it is, the more problems you are likely to have, and the more the sort of nature of the 3D printing kind of shows itself, you know, when you start seeing the little layers and things. But on these, like this is nothing done to these except a single coat of primer, right? And yes, you can see some of the banding that comes from the print, but it is perfectly acceptable for a piece of terrain. Let's look at the other one. Now this one obviously is going to have some pieces where it shows up more. But even in that case, it's not that bad. There we go. So the price is, this sort of core price is 20 euros, and that works out, that's pretty close to dollars. So I think it's like $22, and that's the basics. Now for about 50 bucks, you're gonna get some extra special pieces for doing L-shaped buildings, some linking pieces, you know, more of the other stuff, and of course whatever stretch goals is going on. Yeah, and you know what? I haven't looked closely at this since it first started, and they are so far beyond their initial ask, which was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 500 bucks, and now we're at 10,000. So, well done. And so really it's up to you. Like every level of it is just more of the same, but better, or not even really better because there's more. It's all good. So it's not like, well, I'm only spending $20, so it's not going to be great. No, you know, spend at the base level and you're going to get some great stuff. But as you expand your investment into it, it becomes more expandable, more modular, and you can do more things with it. So I guess what I'm saying is go take a look. If you're doing sci-fi gaming at all, this is something worth taking a look at. I will obviously be kicking into it because I do sci-fi modeling, and I think these are awesome. So that's it for Kickstarter today. Somebody asked me a question recently, and it really got me thinking. So the question was, if all I wanted to do was to print bases for miniatures, should I invest in a 3D printer? And my immediate reaction was, no, what are you, stupid? But I got to really thinking about it. The amount of money that a printer costs, what do bases cost, you know, what can you do with bases? And I started thinking that if you had the money to invest, right, because a cheap 3D printer is going for about like 200 bucks now, maybe less, maybe 150. If you can afford that as a sort of fun purchase, you know, like disposable income style purchase, and your main interest was printing bases, it's not the worst thing in the world. I have actually now been pretty excited by the fact that something as simple as a base for a Mini is something that I can just knock out in almost no time at all. I certainly wouldn't have bought this printer to do it, but if that was my initial goal, if I was thinking that, I just want to be able to knock out bases of various sizes and types that maybe I can't easily get, that's actually not a bad place to start. And that was really where kind of my thinking changed, is that, one, printers aren't that expensive anymore. Two, I really like printing bases. It's fun. You probably saw my video recently about the volcanic lava bases that I did. Well, the core platform that I built those bases on was something that I 3D printed. And the reason was twofold. One is I didn't have any of that size base handy at the moment. Two was that even if I did have the exact appropriate size that Games Workshop would have supplied for a model of that size, it would have been smaller than I wanted it to be. So by printing out my own, I was able to add about 10 millimeters to the length, which made it perfect for what I wanted to do. And really, for me, that's just super exciting. And of course, printing that out, I think, took 45 minutes. And I've been experimenting with doing smaller bases with various amounts of success. Actually, Thingiverse, somebody has some textured bases, or bases, mostly sci-fi, with, sci-fi things on the bottom. Either it's like hex-based tiles, or things that look like diamond plate, various things like that. Free files that you can go just fine and print them out, and they're ready to go. I've been experimenting with doing some recessed bases for some of the miniatures that I've been painting, and they've been working out pretty good. These particular ones are kind of rejects because, and I don't know if you can see it there. Let's see if we can get it to focus. Yeah, black base, always a bad idea. You can see the edges are not the sharpest things in the world, and down near where the build plate is, there we go. You can see that I sometimes get some voids, and I'm not entirely sure why. But again, this is something else that I'm wondering if my enclosure will help with. We'll see. But for the bigger bases, I don't usually have those kinds of problems for whatever reason. So like I said, it was an interesting question. And as a place to start, if you have an idea in mind as to what you want to do with the 3D printer, it won't be long before you're thinking of other things to do with it. And it is a super handy thing to have around. And making bases, even designing them yourself, using 3D design tools like 123D Design, or that program that I can't think of the name of that Microsoft makes, that's a good first project to learn to use those programs. Because all it requires is, I want to create a geometric shape, and then how do I modify that geometric shape to do whatever it is that I want to do. So in my case, like with these, it was, I wanted to taper the edge. Is it a fillet? Well, whatever it's called. It's either fillet or something else, but that sort of rounds off the edge. And then I wanted to recess it, which essentially just meant creating another shape, dropping it in there, and then subtracting the second shape from the first, and creates the... You know what I'm talking about if you've done this before, and if you haven't done it before, it doesn't really matter. But the fact is that it's not hard, and it's a good first thing to try. And I don't think the worst thing in the world would be to spend a couple of $100 on something that you only think you're going to use on bases, because that's not all you're going to use it for. Trust me. So that was the answer to his question, and I just thought it was something that you might also want to know. Okay, last thing for today. There was a problem that I had recently, figured it out, and even passed on this information to a friend of mine who was having the same problem. And the problem is that last time I switched from ABS, which I've said I really like to use, back to PLA, which is pretty much the thing that everybody uses, or at least starts with in terms of printing material. PLA is pretty easygoing, easy to print with, very easy to get good prints. And there are reasons why I prefer ABS and reasons why I prefer PLA. But in this case, I had gone to doing PLA and I started having issues with my prints just stopping, right? Like it just didn't want to, the plastic didn't want to come out of there anymore. And so I kept trying, and it reminded me of the time I was having my spools binding, and that wasn't it though. So I thought I was having problems with the PLA. So I took it out, ran the ABS into it, and everything was fine. But it was at that point that I had the realization of what the issue was, because I could kind of see it. And the issue was that ABS had melted and built up inside the this area here around the tip, the nozzle. And the problem with that is that the ABS has a higher melting point than the PLA, which means that when I switched over to the PLA, there was still a little bit of ABS in here that I didn't realize. And so when it was printing, some of that ABS would get soft, but not fully melt. It would bind up with the PLA, and then it would gunk up the tip, right? So that was really the problem that it was having, is the ABS, because the hot end wasn't hot enough to fully melt the ABS, was getting gunked up and clogging the tip. The easy way to solve that issue is when I switch over from ABS to PLA, all I need to do is make sure that I run the hot end at the melting point for the ABS using the PLA, and just extrude plastic until I'm not seeing any of the ABS. It's one of the reasons why actually it's not a horrible idea if you're using two different types of material to make sure that they're different colors. When I use ABS, I'm generally doing black, and when I do PLA, I'm using gray. It makes it easy to look at the PLA as I'm just extruding it out of the hot end to see if there's any streaks of black in it. Because if I'm seeing streaks of black, it means I'm still got some ABS in there. If you go the other way, if you go from a material that prints at a lower temperature than the one you're now putting in, you shouldn't have that issue. But you're still going to want to make sure that you extrude some extra before you start printing, just to make sure you clear that out of there, because anything that you print from the lower temperature material is likely to not print well. You're not going to get the clogging problem, but you're going to get other problems. So just something to keep in mind. Just make sure that you clear that out. So if you're going from low temp to high temp, cleared out at the higher temperature, even though you're going to be printing with the lower temperature material. That's it. Just a little helpful hint. Had a friend of mine right after I did that and figured that part out, was having the same problems, and he just assumed that PLA was crap. But the truth of the matter is that you just have to be aware of some of these issues. But that's going to do it for today. I think we're all done here. And next time we get together, we'll probably have the enclosure here. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We'll see what else I've been printing and see if I have any more tips for you. But that's going to do it for now. Thank you all for watching, and I will talk to you all later. Bye-bye.